ThinkOrSwim has a built-in function called position_open_PL, which plots this, I think, very ugly looking histogram bar on your ThinkOrSwim charts. In today's video, we're going to upgrade that. We're going to create a simple label which plots your position instead with both the quantity, including an average price if you've dollar cost averaged, and your P&L open in both dollars and percentages. Now this is useful for two main reasons. One, you'll learn how to interact with some key ThinkScript functions, including the portfolio functions. So I think that's your biggest takeaway from today's tutorial. You'll learn how to create a label and how to interact with the portfolio functions. Two, it will allow you to see your open position instead of needing to go to the monitor tab or open up the active trader panel. So it saves you a little bit of time there, one click. The bigger, I think, lesson from today's video will be understanding how to interact with the portfolio functions, which allows you to replace this indicator, the position open P&L indicator, with one of your own. And once you have this data, you can then interact with it, manipulate this data, do other things with it, calculate what you might want your minimum positions to be. Say you want to limit to 2.5% of your account size, you can very easily calculate that inside of a label. There's a lot that you can open up once you understand how to use these portfolio functions. Now, speaking of the portfolio functions, let's start there. The one that we're going to use in today's video is getOpenPL. Now, if we take a look at how this function works, you'll see that it takes in two parameters. The first is what we want the symbol to be, and the second is this variable called profit loss mode. Now, inside of the description, you should notice that profit loss mode is a hyperlink. So if you open it, you will notice that there's two different options that you have available. You can choose either cost basis or the execution price. If you click cost basis tells you that this will calculate the difference between a position's net liquidation value and cost basis times the position size. If you contrast this with execution price, you'll notice that execution price is calculated as the difference between a position's net liquidation value and execution price times the position size. So cost basis versus execution price is where you can specify which profit loss mode you'd like. Now by default, we have profit loss mode as execution price, and that's what we're going to be leaving it as for our particular indicator. Now, say you have a position that you've been holding on for a long period of time, say maybe 20 years. Then you may want to be using the getAggregatedPL function instead. What this getAggregatedPL function allows you to do, which is a new function by the way, is it allows you to take the ThinkOrSwim aggregation period here and allow you to break down what has been your position and your P&L over time. So for example, if you loaded in 20 years worth of data, you would see from the beginning of that chart period what your aggregated P&L is. However, if you had just 5 years worth of data, getOpenPL would show you what your P&L is from the open position, so still from the opening time 20 years ago. Get data would show you what your open P&L is if you set this to 5 years to just from that first date 5 years ago. So it allows you to narrow down your window and use ThinkOrSwim's aggregation period to see what kind of data you want plotted. Now for today's video, let's get started with building this simple indicator first. So I'm going to remove this indicator and I'm going to click create here to start writing our own code. I'll give this indicator a name. I'm going to call mine TI_position tracker. We can delete all of the code inside and we can start very simply by declaring this indicator as an upper. What this does is it tells ThinkOrSwim that, hey, plot this on the upper panel as a label. Don't plot it down as a lower panel indicator. Now, the next thing we need to do is get the actual quantity of shares that we have along with the open P&L. So if we come back to our portfolio functions here, you'll notice there's also a getQuantity function. This takes in only one parameter, which is the actual symbol. So if we were to say, in this case, I have a quantity in FedEx of 2 as a test position. So let's see if this works. I'm going to simply say def quantity, and I'm going to say get quantity here, and call the function and not even specify the symbol here. Otherwise, I could say get symbol here if I wanted to, but instead, I'm going to remove that for the time being, and let's plot this inside of a label. Now, if you haven't seen our how to create a label video, I'd recommend watching that. But very simply, a label takes in 3 different parameters. The first is if you want to see the label, and if so, what are the Boolean parameters for that? I'm simply going to say yes, since I always want to see this label. The second parameter is what you'd like to see in the label, and the third parameter is the color of the label. Now, if I click apply here, we should see the number 2 inside, which tells us that we're getting the right quantity here. Now, the next thing I can do is check if we have an open position. What this would allow us to do is for all of the symbols in which we don't have an open position, instead of seeing an A inside of the label, we just don't see the label at all. So I'll say something like active position here. And what we can do is simply check if quantity is not equal to 0, then 1, else 0. So what we're doing here is checking if our quantity is not empty, meaning we have something in the position, then return true, else return false. Now using those two components, we can get our average price. So let's say average price here. And if we come back to our portfolio functions, you'll see that there's a get average price, which very similarly takes in one parameter, just a symbol. So I come back inside, I can say get average price, add the semicolon here, and we can also fetch the P&L. We'll say open P&L. We already saw this function. We'll call this as well. And let's go ahead and test each of these out. So I'm going to add average price here first, make sure we see a number, and make sure we see a number and no error when I add open P&L. Okay, cool. So far we know that all of these functions are working correctly. We've been able to fetch data from inside of our portfolio with just these two simple functions, or rather 3 functions that we have so far. Now let's create one more variable, which turns our open P&L into a percent. So what we'll do here is we'll check, first of all, to make sure that this is an active position. If this is an active position and our average price is not equal to 0, this should take care of any edge cases, then the way we would calculate our percentage is by taking our open P&L here and dividing by our average price and multiplying that by our quantity times 100. And what we need to do is add some parentheses here. So what we're going to check is if our open P&L and then average price times our quantity, which will give us what has been our total investment. And open P&L would be the return on that investment multiplied by 100. And we can also wrap this inside of an absolute value to make sure we account for any short side positions as well. Let's go ahead and test this. Whoops. If this, else, we can say return 0. All right, so now we can see that this number is showing up as 2.33%. We can format that using the as percent function, but for right now, what we have calculated is the average price, our open P&L displayed as both dollars and percent, and we know what our quantity is. Those are all of the pieces we need to create our add label. So now let's bring everything together. Let's say add label if we have an active position. So as long as we have an active position, we'd like to see this label. Let's add position first. And actually, I'm going to say quantity and add a space and add in the words quantity. And then we can add in the at character and we'll say as price. And we would like to display our average price here. And I'm going to first close that out and let's test this on its own. So far we're seeing quantity 2 at 300.96. That all looks correct. We can also add in a dollar sign here if you would like to leave that a little bit cleaner. Now let's move on to the next side of this, which is adding in our actual P&L. So I will add in another plus. Here add in a space, a divider, and now we're going to continue adding in our P&L. So I'll say as dollars, and we'll display the open P&L. And then we will display this in parentheses. as OpenPL percent, and then I can close that parentheses. So let's see how this looks. And in fact, let me add in something here that makes it clear that this is our P&L. We'll add in a space. And that looks a lot cleaner. And in fact, we can use as dollars here instead of as price. And that means we don't need to have this dollar sign either. Last thing we can do is format our percent here as our percent. And now we have this returning the way we would expect. Now, if you wanted to change this from a color of yellow to instead be green if your position had a positive P&L or red if you had a red P&L position, you could add in an if statement here. So we might add in if open P&L is greater than 0, then color.green, else color.red. Apply, and now we have some color logic as well. Very simple indicator, but hopefully through this indicator, you understood how to reference some portfolio functions. You understood how to create add label code using the different parameters and making this add label code a little bit more beautiful to look at in terms of the formatting here, understanding how you can add separators, how you can add stylings, and make this look like a very clean label that you might use while you trade, or more importantly, gives you an idea of how to build your own indicators. If you found this interesting, be sure to check out all of the other tutorials that we have available on our website. Most of these are completely free and they'll help you understand how to build powerful ThinkOrSwim indicators much beyond what we built here to get useful information from ThinkOrSwim and turn ThinkOrSwim into your trading powerhouse. Take care, everyone. Good luck trading, and I'll see you in our next update.